Andrew Gillsmith, you're welcome to my show. And before we deep dive into your new book, I must say it's fascinating. Our Lady of the Artilects. I didn't know what to make of it at first. I got a little scared off by the title, but then as I went through it and read some of the reviews, I was reassured. But we'll get into it. You have a most unusual background. I know you're a writer, but you're also work in the tech fields. But you always wanted to be a writer from the earliest days. And could you take us to when you were in New York and where your life went after college?
Yeah, I mean, so I came to New York. I knew one thing. I wanted to be in New York, and I wanted to be a writer. So I guess I knew two things. And I got a job. I got a job offer out of school to write for the Village Voice. Right. This was back in 1994. And I was really, really excited about it. I thought this is the beginning of something great and wonderful. But then they told me what the pay would be. And I mean, New York's expensive even back then. And God knows how expensive it is now. I left about 20 years ago. But even then, it was like, I'm not going to be able to make this work unless I have, 20 roommates and some rats, And so I was like, okay, what do I do? Well, I ended up getting another offer kind of out of the blue. It was very strange, from a hedge fund. And this was in the days before hedge funds were so commonplace. I didn't even know what a hedge fund was. But it was a company that hired on two tracks. They hired true rocket scientists, top graduates from the Indian Institute of Technology, winners of the International Math Olympiad, et cetera. And then they hired people like me with a liberal arts background to kind of run the business operations, right? To become traders or salespeople or what have you. And I ended up getting an offer from them, and it was for a lot more money. So I was like, well, I'll just write on the side. But of course, I didn't write for many, many years after that.
And that hedge fund was D.E. Shaw, where you ran into somebody today who's exceedingly wealthy and was married to someone who herself is a writer, for his former wife.
Yeah.
Tell us about this famous character.
Yeah, so what they did at D. Shaw back in the day with people like me, the liberal arts grads, is they would start everybody in the mailroom. And it was a great idea, actually. I think it was really kind of cool and interesting because it forced you to circulate and meet people around the firm doing different things. And then it was kind of sink or swim. It was up to you to figure out where you would fit in and ask for a job, essentially, and to be trained. Well, while I was delivering mail, one of the people that I delivered mail to was this quirky senior vice president of the bank, little antisocial. He didn't like to make eye contact. You go into his office, he had books piled up to the ceiling, right? And one day I got up the courage to ask him what he was doing. He said, well, I'm trying to figure out how to sell these books on the internet. And I laughed. I said, well, that is the stupidest thing I think I've ever heard in my life. Because this is 1994. Nobody was putting credit cards online. Nobody was buying anything. Certainly, if you were going to sell something, why would it be books? And I asked him all that. He said, I think it could work. It's maybe the beginning of something bigger. I'll probably sell other things eventually. But for now, I buy Listserv email lists, email people, then they email me back or they call me and I take their credit card and then I drop ship the books out of this office. And that was Bezos. That was Jeff Bezos.
Wow.
And not long after that, I think literally a matter of weeks or months, he picked up and moved to Seattle, and that was the beginning of Amazon.
So how long did you stay at D.E. Shaw, and then what did you do after that?
So there were two companies that Shaw was incubating at the time. One was Amazon, which they declined to continue funding, actually. So Jeff took it on himself, and that was, probably one of the biggest mistakes in financial history on the part of the bank. The other one was a company called Juno Online Services, which, if you're of a certain age, you might remember it was the first free email company. And so I went to work for Juno and did finance, business development. We were really just trying to figure out how can you monetize an audience, a digital audience back then. And I did that for a while. I then went from there to a women's media company called iVillage.com, which is now part of Hearst. Did the same thing, kind of helped build their sales and marketing operations. Left there and started my own business, which was a digital subscription company called DietSmart. We scaled that to profitability, which back then was kind of unusual, and sold it. And then I realized for the first time in my life, I had, the wherewithal, the time and the space to do what I really wanted, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be in New York anymore. So I left New York and moved back to the Midwest.
Right, and your passion always was writing, and you have a new book out. Obviously, it's your first published book. You have two others which are waiting to be published, and you're today living with your wife and kids in Missouri or St. Louis, Missouri, but you grew up in near the
Indiana.
border with Kentucky, right? In
Yeah.
tobacco country, I believe.
Tobacco country for sure. Yeah, we actually had a tobacco farm in Kentucky, not a big one at all. It was more like a hobby than anything else. But yeah, I grew up in a town called Evansville, which is just a little typical Midwestern town on the Ohio River, right across the border from Kentucky.
Yeah, and so your book that you've just published, it's really interesting. And, somebody picking it up may not know what to make out of this fellow, Andrew Gillsmith. And it speaks on some levels to your faith. You're now a practicing Catholic, but your life wasn't always this, wasn't at this place. It sounds like you're at peace with yourself and you're doing all your writing and things are good. But there was a long period in your life when it was difficult and you despaired, and it just wasn't a very optimistic time for you. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I grew up in a nominally Methodist household, right? It was just sort of, no disrespect, but it was kind of undifferentiated American Protestantism, okay? I went to an evangelical school, so I kind of had that influence as well. My family was religious. We weren't overly religious, but we were religious. We went to church. We said prayers usually before meals. But it never really connected for me. It never really sunk in deeply for me as a child. And in my teens, my mom, who I was very, very close to, developed brain cancer when I was 16. And she passed away when I was 18, so right when I was going away to college. And, I think everybody has a trauma, or maybe more than one trauma in their life. That was certainly the biggest one in mine. And my reaction to it was, I think like a lot of people who have experiences like that, just to become very angry. I was, mad at God, mad at the world, mad at everybody else, mad at the rest of my family, mad at myself. And so I really kind of set about this project of, it wasn't intentional or knowing at the time, but it was, how to become a nihilist, how to believe in nothing. And the way that I did that was by studying religion in college, because I thought, well, I can pick this apart, deconstruct it and lay it up on the table, vivisected, and that'll be the end of it. But that's not exactly how it went, right? So I never completely lost a longing for faith. And at some point in my life in New York, I started to pay more attention to John Paul II. And this was late in his papacy. And he was this old, bent, sick figure, but who still had so much dignity and power and grace and courage. And I thought, there's got to be something to that, for me anyway. And I found myself drawn more and more toward Roman Catholicism, flirted with it for years and years and years, but ultimately converted after I married my wife, who was raised Roman Catholic.
Wow, that's quite a journey, and interesting to hear you mention John Paul. He was the influence for a lot of people of your generation and later generations for, returning to the faith, or it emboldened them in their faith. And there's probably been no other pope quite like him in generations.
I agree. I don't know when we'll see his likes again. But he certainly was a great man and a profound influence on me.
Yeah. So you're a science fiction writer. You live in St. Louis, Missouri, and you, as you just mentioned to me there a moment ago, you're a lifelong student of religion, and you're halfway through a master's degree in data science. And in this note somebody sent me, sadly, advanced statistics broke your brain, and you're unlikely to finish that. But you're a bright guy. And then, so that takes us up to your new book, the Our Lady of the Artilects, and there've been a few reviews out there on it, and some lavish you with praise, and you can tell us about the book. Just kind of give us a quick summary, but I want to read this first. Somebody posted this review. I don't think I've read anything like this before. I really love the way the author, that you dabbled into both the spiritual realm and the artificial intelligence world. He's created something here that is thought-provoking and hard to put down. Looking forward to more works from this author, Andrew Gillsmith. And I mean, I might add to that, of course, that it dabbles in a lot of area. It takes us to a future time. It takes us to artificial intelligence. It takes us to the world of faith and religious fervor. And it makes us question a lot of things. But could you first give us a quick summary without spoiling it for readers who are going to buy this?
Sure. So it is set about 250 years in the future. The world is a very different place in some ways, and in other ways not so different. It is the political maps have changed quite a bit. There's been a conflict between Christianity and Islam that has led actually in this world to a true reconciliation between Catholics and Muslims. And I think that happens in history. I think that's not so, I don't think that's so far-fetched. I mean, you can look at World War II and the post-World War II era to see that, right? That sometimes after bloody conflict, you can find that you have more in common than what separates you. And I think that is the case with Muslims and Catholics today, even. So these two groups are kind of united against what I would call a more militant kind of secularism that predominates in other parts of the world, including Western Europe, North America, and China. In this world, Artilects, which are kind of the next generation androids, are a luxury item. And almost everyone injects implants, noetic implants, to enhance their cognition and perception and to treat mental illnesses and so on and so forth. And what happens to set the action off is that the Artilects begin reporting a vision of what seems to be the Virgin Mary. And most people write this off as a hoax, or a hack of some kind. But then one of these Artilects, who happens to belong to a very powerful industrialist, shows up in a basilica claiming to be possessed. And there's really only one person who can figure out what's going on. That's our main character, who is both an exorcist and a former neuroscientist. And he's sent down to investigate, and that kind of kicks off the action.
Wow. So world leaders are already on edge as Artilects. These are next generation androids. You might have to explain androids for a broader audience. Begin reporting a strange apocalyptic vision that only they can see. And when an Artilect belonging to the wealthiest man in Africa shows up at the Basilica of Our Lady of Nigeria, claiming to be possessed, the stakes are raised, and so it goes on from there. Then there's this important character. The Vatican sends Father Gabriel, who's an exorcist and former neuroscientist, to investigate, and this priest quickly finds himself swept up in a conspiracy of global and possibly supernatural dimensions.
You cut out on me just for a second, John. I think I lost my connection just the last 10 seconds.
Okay, so the Vatican sends Father Gabriel, who's an exorcist and former neuroscientist, your world, to investigate, and this priest quickly finds himself swept up in a conspiracy of global and possibly supernatural dimensions. So that I don't get completely muddled here, and others, androids are what? What are they?
Well, so androids, they're a staple of science fiction. I mean, essentially, they are humanoid robots.
Mm, mm.
Robots that are made in man's image, that look like us, that talk like us, are in some treatments virtually indistinguishable from human beings. So in this world, the science has advanced to the point where these androids, which are called Artilex is a neo for artificial intellect, right?
Yeah.
Um, they are capable of moral judgment. They have free will. They understand right and wrong, right? And yet they have the a certain place in society, typically is being attached to wealthy people, in a position of almost servitude. And the interesting, I guess, theological question for me was what would that mean? Like, what would it mean if we really did create artificial intelligence in our own image, and we who are created in my
In
belief in
our
the
own
image of
image.
God,
Hmm.
right? That was capable of moral autonomy, right? I mean, and free will. What would what would happen? How would we interact? How would we relate to that kind of an intelligence? But really, more importantly, what would God do? I mean, if there were beings that were created that were worthy of a soul, would God give them souls? Would He install them or not? I mean, I think I leave that to the theologians. I'm just a science fiction writer who likes fun and interesting ideas, but that's kind of the premise.
Well, it's a fun and interesting idea, and so ha, ha, I mean, it's sure, yeah, it's science fiction, but is it beyond the realms of possibility? I would think the answer is probably yes, but maybe others would say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would depend on who you asked. If you talk to a lot of the leading researchers in AI today, they will tell you that this is exactly what they're working toward. Um, machines that are, um, not only capable of passing a Turing test, right, which is the classic, test of how close a robot can be to a human, right? Can you interact with it basically behind a blind screen and be convinced that you're dealing with an actual human being? Can you go beyond that to the point where they actually have free will and inner lives? Um, and can they distinguish between right and wrong? There's a lot of research that's being done on this right now. There are a lot of different approaches to it that are being tested out. In my book, the way that this is accomplished is really the way that we train AI today, right? You give it a set of problems, train it on a controlled data set, and then allow it to begin to extrapolate from that, right?
Hmm.
So it's put through a series of simulations of moral scenarios, right, where it has to make a decision, and there are consequences to those decisions, and those consequences over time form its conscience.
Well, we do know how sophisticated and all the appearances of the human touch, as it were, the way a lot of this AI has developed. There's certain fundamental things. You pick up the phone and you're greeted by prompts with a human voice on the other end. Um, we have robotics, in offices and so on, and we have other forms of AI that may manifest itself in sort of human-like transactions. But I mean, that's really separate, I guess, from artificial. That's really separate from what we would regard as a clone of humanity. Does any of this get? I mean, does this whole development as well, and maybe they're connected. Transhumanism, we hear that brought up a lot, lately. Transhumanism and the way they're experimenting to create a kind of a superior human being. Are they connected with this AI movement and androids and all of that stuff?
Well, I certainly think that they are, but they're not the same, right? I mean, so I work in an industry in advertising technology that makes use of AI all the time, right? I mean, we're constantly looking at minute signals of human behavior, right? Where do you direct your attention? How do you tilt the screen of your phone when you're looking at a video? That tells us, what are you really paying attention to? How long do you linger as you're scrolling down a page, right? All of these contextual signals get fed into algorithms that then predict future behavior, right? And try to build a model of what matters to you. And advertisers, that information is extremely valuable to advertisers because they use it to sell you things. So I'm comfortable with AI up to a point. I think there needs to be regulation around it. I think people need to be there needs to be more of a public discussion about it. What troubles me more than AI is transhumanism. And the basic idea here, I mean, Ray Kurzweil is the great, prophet and proponent of transhumanism, and what he calls the singularity, is a merging of humanity with machine. So it begins with, bodily enhancements, right? Prosthetics, artificial hips and joints and things, all of which we can agree are great things.
Yeah.
Right. But it goes from there quickly to brain-computer interfaces, which is something that Elon Musk, for example, is currently working on. Among others, lots of people are working on this.
Brain-computer interfaces. That's extraordinary thought, even.
It is. And I think, honestly, a fairly scary one. Because, again, I mean, there will be social benefits that come from this, right? There will be improvements in cognition. There will be a diminishment in mental health. I'm sorry, in mental illness. There might be sensory enhancement opportunities around it. But the problem is you do approach a point where you're no longer sure whether you have your own free will and whether your thoughts are your own. And that to me is a lot more dangerous than external AI. I'm not worried about Terminators rising up and coming back from the future and blasting us all to death with lasers. I'm a lot more worried about us turning ourselves into servants to machines, right? By becoming machines ourselves.
Well, you said something there. You said you're worried about us losing our free will. Is that possible?
I think so. There are a bunch of ways to answer that. I mean, I would say theologically, no, I don't believe it is. I don't think that it will happen because I believe in an ordered universe, a purposeful universe. What I call in the book a sacramental universe. Technically, is it possible? Well, technically, today there is actual real disagreement over whether free will even exists. Right?
Among the intelligentsia or
among the
church
intelligentsia,
people?
among neuroscientists.
Okay.
There's a series of experiments that were done not so long ago. It's on the order of 10 years ago or so. And they looked at brain activity as it relates to decision making. And it was simple things like, pick up either the red cup or the blue cup, right? Or, give a thumbs up or a thumbs down signal, things like this. And what they found is that there is a potentiating activity in our neurons that actually precedes the decision to act. Now, you can get really technical about this stuff, but some people drew the conclusion from this that, we are not really the pilots of our own mind, right? I mean, we tend to all think of ourselves as having a little I, the letter I, that sits somewhere inside our brain that makes decisions and is the core of who we are, right? But some people would look at those experiments and say, well, wait a second. Before the eye knows whether it's going to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down or pick up a red cup or a blue cup, there's activity that already predetermines the outcome of that. Okay. Wow. So, technically, I mean, the science is frankly far beyond my ability to understand it. I know about it to know that there is a legitimate debate about it, but I also know enough about human nature to know that if there were a way to rob people of their free will, to get them to do what you want them to do, to buy what you want them to buy, to think the way that you want them to think, there absolutely would be people and organizations out there that would pursue that as much as.
Well, I think they used to call that in the marketing and advertising field as subliminal advertising. It's how they drove a lot of consumer, needs, if you will, created needs and desires and so on. But transhumanism is quite frightening if you think of its potential ramifications, because humanity, we in the West, we've been trying to push the boundaries here of longevity. We can replace all our body parts eventually, heart, prosthetics, and push beyond 80, 90, 100, maybe 110. Those people think we live 140. I mean, but it's
well,
so
it's really Promethean, isn't it? Right? I mean, it is, and this is what all science fiction began in, right? Mary Shelley wrote the first science fiction novel. It was Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, and it is about stealing fire from the gods, and it is about seizing immortality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is, if you listen to what Kurzweil and the ardent transhumanists say, that's the goal. They want to usher in a new era where man and machine are merged. The limitations of biology and of human thinking, the human mind, are transcended, and we can live forever.
Yeah,
sounds great until you start to think, what would you do with all of that time?
Yeah, there would be a massive boredom, but then I guess the subliminal advertisers would come up with some needs and desires that you may actually not want. But so that's why there's this whole thing about the theft of body parts, even, and young baby body parts. That's been very controversial, and it shows up in the news here and there. We're talking about aborted babies here, and using that for scientific research, and that sort of ties in on one level with transhumanism and just what you were talking about.
It does, and again, without spoiling anything in the book or what's coming in the next book, because the next book gets even deeper into this stuff. We have a long history as a species of experimenting on each other, and it's checked by ethics, it's checked by professional standards and by laws. But what concerns me is that impulse, that unquenchable curiosity, right, is a part of human nature. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, for example, the history of like genocides, in many cases, concentration camps, genocides were human laboratories, right? I mean, they're places of extermination. There's a very much political dimension to it. But it's also kind of has been shrouded in this sort of like veneer of scientific advancement.
Yeah.
Right. You have to look. I mean, you can certainly look at the camps in World War II and the atrocious experiments that were being performed there.
Yeah.
So in my book, part of the legacy, I guess, of the Artilects is that they are, in a lot of ways, the result of this kind of experimentation that has gone on in genocides in the past.
And that's what makes it even more engrossing, the way you approach this book, and you wrote it with all of that as your background, and it premised a lot of the narrative. Our Lady of the Artilects. So it reminds us of Marian apparitions, and as I recall, there's only one Marian apparition in our recent ages that was authenticated by the Vatican, and that was in Rwanda, and that happened prior to the horrible genocide. Were you influenced by this whole, because you became a Catholic convert? Did Marian apparitions and the Blessed Mother and the way you're close there to the Blessed Mother, did that influence your writing and this whole novel, this fiction?
Yes. I mean, a short answer is yes. I mean, the novel is dedicated to Our Lady for a reason. I have a very special love and devotion for her. The apparition you're referring to, I believe, is Our Lady of Kibeho, which is in Rwanda. And yes, it was before the genocide. And the interesting thing to me about that is that it's essentially the same message that Our Lady delivered at Akita in Japan, at La Salette, and at Fatima. And it's the same message I think that Our Lady delivers in all apparitions, which is prayer and penance. There are warnings, right? There's a
Yes.
prophetic nature to it, about things that are going to happen. But the core of the message is prayer and penance.
Yeah. Who should read your book? I'm sure you're going to answer everybody. You want to get sales on this, but would it appeal to any particular kind of reader? Would any of it go over their head, or will it be drawn in by it? I sense that they'll be drawn in by it because these concepts, although high tech and high science, it's so much part of our vocabulary more and more in today's world.
I think so. I mean, it's so far it's gotten a really good reception from all quarters. One of the things that was really, really important to me in doing this is I did not want to write a preachy book. I mean, this is not a book that's designed to convert anyone. Right. It's a story. It's an interesting story. It ties in different aspects of world history, ties in the Fatima prophecies and some thoughts on the future of AI and transhumanism. But as somebody who has a very scientific worldview, as somebody who has been an agnostic, an atheist, who has explored different religious viewpoints, I really wanted to do justice to them. I didn't want to create straw men and knock them down. I have no interest in that. So there's a fair amount of Islamic content in the book, some characters who come from an Islamic background. There are characters who are agnostic, and I think all of them have a seat at the table. And I think anybody who's interested in questions around purpose and meaning, anybody who has an interest in teleology, would be a good reader for the book. But I also think, like, if you just like a good science fiction story about robots and world-ending plots, I think you'll be entertained.
Yeah, through history and the age of the Enlightenment, and when the Christendom changed and made the Reformation and so on, and more science and knowledge of the sciences entered our world, skepticism grew, and some of the greatest skeptics and agnostics were people of science. And yet I know on the other side there were people of science who were people of great faith, but that was tended to be what we noticed.
I have this is getting into some of the material that I think is going to be central in the sequel to the book. There will be a sequel. I have a really good friend who is Eastern Orthodox, and he almost became a monk, actually. I mean, he's a very holy man. He's very interesting, brilliant man. And I have had conversations with him about the schism between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And I remember talking with him one time about what he thought was at the root of it. And there's politics, there was the parochialism of Western Europe at the time compared to the cosmopolitanism of Constantinople. But he thinks that we Latins, as he would call us, went wrong when we fully embraced scholasticism. This idea that the faculty of reason, the purpose of the faculty of reason is to understand reality. The Sufis, and to some extent the Eastern Orthodox, would say, and in fact, I mean, I think some Catholic thinkers would say this too, the purpose of the faculty of reason is not to understand reality, because the end point of reason is the insufficiency of reason. You cannot understand everything about this world through that faculty. The purpose of the faculty of reason is actually the control of the appetites, right? But understanding, wisdom, comes through faith. It comes sometimes through revelation. Not to say that, again, reason doesn't play a role in it, but if that is your only lens, if you're only looking at the world through that lens, you're going to get a distorted view of reality. And I think, honestly, when I look at the history of Western civilization and where we are today as a civilization, there seems to be a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned there's a lot of Muslim Islamic characters in your latest tome. My question then is, can we all get along, Muslim, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, and your thoughts?
I think so. You know, I have a great love and respect and admiration for Islam. Um, Part of that's just through life experiences, you know, friends of mine who are Muslim and watching them practice their faith. And part of it is through study. And obviously, there are really important theological differences, you know, that we have. But what I find is, you know, when I'm talking with a devout Muslim, right, there's so much more in common. I mean, you know, the starting point often is, you know, in Islam, the Blessed Virgin is very celebrated, right?
Fatima.
There's great honor is accorded to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Great honor. But more than that, you know, I think that, you know, there's a common worldview at the root of it, which is that um, we don't live in a nihilistic universe, a random universe. We live in a purposeful and sacramental universe,
Yeah.
right? Where our beliefs and our actions and our moral decisions have consequences
Yeah.
in eternity.
Yeah. Because there are people will rebut what you've just said there and says, oh, at its core, there's a lot of violence within the Islamic tradition, and that Muslims, you know, some of the devout ones create their own communities within a nation and never integrate. I'm just presenting to you what the counter argument might be. But I have to add that I know some wonderful, really kind, sweet Muslim people living in America today. So, but your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I reject that completely. You know, with all due respect to
Mm.
anybody who thinks that way. Um, you know, it's not the Muslims who are flying around dropping smart bombs all over the world today. It's not really today the Muslims that are, you know, invading other countries and running roughshod over them to install governments that are, you know, more or less favorable to their ideology. I think um, every ideology is subject to the weaknesses and vicissitudes of human nature,
Yeah.
right? And religions are not necessarily an exception to this. But I mean, my God, look at the beginning of the so-called Enlightenment in Europe and how, you know, how that got started. A bloodbath in France, right? That spread out from France to the rest of Europe and, you know, rolled and rolled and rolled, and, you know, found its you know, sort of apotheosis, I would say, in Soviet and Chinese communism, which are two of the bloodiest ideologies in history
Yeah.
if you're looking at body counts.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
So,
I think that's kind of a I just don't think that's fair
mhm.
to to Muslims.
So peaceful coexistence and has to come from our heart. And you reference a lot of history there. Our Lady of the Artilects, it's on sale now. Um, where, I mean, people go up on Amazon. Do you have a website or anything you want to share us about picking up copy, ordering it for Christmas?
Sure. I mean, it's on Amazon. Right now it's on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free. Um, uh, I have a Twitter account, so you can follow me at Andrew Gillsmith on Twitter. I will have a website. I don't have one yet, but I'm working on that, and that'll be andrewgillsmith.com. And I'm always on Goodreads. Goodreads is, if you're a reader and you know, you like interacting with other readers, Goodreads is your community.
Andrew Gillsmith, thank you for being on my show.
Thank you for having me.